I never thought that my expertise in medieval history and exorcism would lead me to the brink of unimaginable horror. As a historian and a priest, I've seen my share of the unexplainable, but nothing prepared me for what we unearthed at the ancient monastery. Our excavation team, driven by curiosity and the promise of historical discovery, stumbled upon artifacts that should have remained buried. I was called to decipher their origins and significance, but instead, I opened a door to a nightmare. This is my story. The monastery stood on a remote hill, its ruins half consumed by time and nature. Our team, consisting of archaeologists, historians, and a few eager graduate students, was thrilled by the potential discoveries hidden beneath centuries of dust and debris. The first few days were routine, filled with the excitement of uncovering long-forgotten relics and piecing together the past. It was on the fourth day that we discovered a hidden chamber, sealed off from the rest of the monastery. The entrance was concealed behind a large, weathered stone, its surface etched with symbols I recognized from my studies, symbols of protection and warding. A sense of unease settled over me as we pried the stone away, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. The air grew colder as we ventured down, our flashlights cutting through the thick, musty air. At the bottom, we found a small room filled with religious artifacts, crucifixes, ancient tomes, and relics that looked distinctly medieval. Among these items was a particularly disturbing find: a large, iron-bound chest covered in inscriptions. The language was archaic, but I recognized it as Latin. As the team marveled at the artifacts, I focused on the chest. The inscriptions were a mixture of prayers and incantations, many of which were related to exorcisms. My heart raced as I realized the significance of our discovery. This chest had been used in rituals to banish demons. Its presence here suggested that the monastery had been a place not just of worship, but of desperate, perhaps even violent, spiritual warfare. Against my better judgment, I decided to open the chest. Inside, we found a collection of tools and texts related to exorcism: holy water vials, ancient manuscripts, and other religious paraphernalia. But there was something else, a palpable, oppressive energy that seemed to seep out as soon as the chest was opened. The air felt heavier, and a cold draft swept through the chamber. I shared my concerns with the team, but they were too engrossed in the historical significance of the find to heed my warnings. We cataloged the artifacts and prepared to transport them back to our base camp. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that was meant to remain hidden. The monastery, once a place of silent reverence, now felt like a tomb of unspeakable secrets. The true horror began to unfold the following day. If only we had known the consequences of our curiosity. The following morning, I woke up with an unshakable sense of dread. The air felt thick with an unseen presence, and as I glanced around our makeshift camp, I noticed that others seemed on edge as well. Whispers of strange dreams and unsettling noises during the night circulated among the team. As a priest, I had always been sensitive to the spiritual world, and I knew something was terribly wrong. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I gathered the team and suggested we start by thoroughly examining the artifacts in the light of day. We laid out the items from the chest on a long table, and as I began to translate the ancient texts, the true nature of our discovery became clear. These were no ordinary religious artifacts. They were tools for exorcisms, and the texts detailed rituals and incantations meant to bind and expel demons. The more I read, the more it felt like the very words on the pages were charged with a malevolent energy. As I translated aloud, I could see fear growing in the eyes of my colleagues. One passage, in particular, stood out. It described a ritual that, if performed incorrectly, could release the very demons it was meant to contain. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized we had unknowingly stumbled into something far beyond our control. The atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Shadows seemed to dance at the edges of our vision, and a palpable sense of dread hung over us. I advised caution, urging everyone to refrain from interacting with the artifacts any further until we had a better understanding of what we were dealing with. However, curiosity got the better of some, and against my warnings, a few team members began experimenting with the relics. That evening, the camp was eerily silent. The usual camaraderie and excitement had been replaced by hushed conversations and fearful glances. As night fell, I felt compelled to pray, seeking guidance and protection. I was deep in meditation when a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness. We all rushed out of our tents, flashlights cutting through the darkness, and found one of the graduate students, Jessica, standing at the edge of the excavation site, trembling and pale. Through gasps and sobs, she described seeing a shadowy figure moving among the ruins, its eyes glowing with a sinister red light. Others soon reported similar sightings, unexplained figures lurking in the darkness, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The realization hit us all at once. We had unleashed something from the monastery, something that had been imprisoned for centuries. Panic set in, and I knew we had to act quickly. I gathered the team and explained that we needed to return the artifacts to the chest and perform a binding ritual to seal whatever we had released. As we hurried to gather the items, the oppressive presence grew stronger, the shadows more menacing. It felt like we were racing against time, fighting an unseen enemy that was growing bolder by the minute. As we began the ritual, strange things started happening. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble, and an unnatural wind whipped through the ruins, carrying with it the faint sound of distant, tortured wails. I recited the incantations with all the faith and conviction I could muster, praying that it would be enough to contain the evil we had unleashed. The night stretched on, and with each passing moment, the sense of doom intensified. We were battling forces beyond our comprehension, and the outcome was far from certain. That night marked the beginning of our ordeal. Sleep was elusive, and when it did come, it was filled with nightmares that left us gasping for breath. Faces twisted in agony, whispers in unknown languages, and the ever-present feeling of being watched plagued our dreams. When dawn finally broke, we emerged from our tents, faces drawn and eyes hollow from the lack of rest. As we regrouped, it became clear that our situation was deteriorating rapidly. One of the archaeologists, Dr. Roberts, was missing. We found his tent empty, belongings scattered, and no trace of where he might have gone. Panic and fear rippled through the team. We searched the surrounding area frantically, calling out his name, but the only response was the unsettling silence of the ancient monastery. The oppressive atmosphere was almost tangible now, as if the very air was thick with malevolence. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, and the cold draft that had begun when we opened the chest was now a constant, icy presence. Desperation drove us to consider the unthinkable, that Dr. Roberts had been taken by the forces we had unwittingly unleashed. As the lead historian and exorcist, the responsibility fell on me to find a way to protect my team. I delved deeper into the text we had found, searching for any clue or ritual that could help us. The manuscripts were filled with detailed descriptions of demonic entities, their weaknesses, and the exorcisms used to banish them. One passage, in particular, stood out. It described a powerful binding ritual that required not just words, but faith and sacrifice. We gathered in the main hall of the monastery, the ancient stones echoing our every move. I explained the ritual to the team, emphasizing the importance of unwavering belief and collective effort. We needed to recreate the protective circle described in the text, using the relics and holy symbols we had found. As we began, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the air seemed to crackle with a sinister energy. Chanting the incantations, we formed the circle, placing the artifacts at precise intervals. The temperature dropped further, and an unnatural darkness began to seep into the room, dimming the light of our flashlights. My voice trembled as I led the group in prayer, invoking every ounce of faith and spiritual strength I had. The manuscripts warned that the ritual would draw the attention of the demonic entities, and I could feel their presence closing in around us. Suddenly, the shadows seemed to coalesce into figures, dark and twisted forms that circled the edge of our protective barrier. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and their whispers grew louder, a cacophony of hatred and malice. We stood our ground, reciting the binding incantations with renewed fervor. The circle of light around us flickered, wavering under the assault of the dark forces. In the midst of the chaos, one of the students, Mark, faltered, his voice breaking as fear overtook him. The shadows seized the opportunity, lunging at the weak point in our circle. With a surge of determination, I stepped forward, raising a crucifix and shouting the final words of the ritual. There was a blinding flash of light, and a powerful shockwave erupted from the center of our circle, pushing the demonic entities back. For a moment, it seemed as if we had succeeded. The darkness receded, and the air grew warmer. But as the dust settled, we realized that something was terribly wrong. The ritual had not been completed perfectly, and the demonic presence was still there, lurking just beyond our reach, waiting for another chance to strike. The sense of relief we felt was short-lived. As the initial shock of the failed ritual wore off, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were trapped in a battle against an ancient evil, and our first attempt to banish it had only managed to anger it further. The oppressive atmosphere returned with a vengeance, heavier and more malevolent than before. Determined not to let fear cripple us, I gathered the team once more. It was clear we needed a new plan. The texts indicated that the binding ritual had to be performed at the exact spot where the demons were originally sealed. That meant returning to the hidden chamber below the monastery. The thought of descending those dark stairs again filled me with dread, but there was no other choice. We prepared as best as we could, gathering all the holy relics and protective symbols we could find. The team was visibly shaken, but their resolve was strengthened by the realization that this was our only chance to escape the nightmare we had unleashed. As we made our way back to the hidden chamber, every creak and shadow seemed amplified, each step echoing with foreboding. The chamber was even colder than before, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. We quickly set up the ritual space, placing the relics in a precise configuration. As I began to recite the incantations, the temperature dropped further, our breath visible in the frigid air. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, pressing in on us from all sides. The ritual demanded unwavering focus and faith, but the oppressive presence in the chamber made it almost impossible to concentrate. As we chanted, the shadows began to coalesce once more, forming into grotesque shapes that lurked at the edges of our circle. Their whispers grew louder, filled with malice and hatred, trying to break our resolve. Suddenly, one of the relics fell out of place, and the protective circle wavered. A gust of icy wind rushed through the chamber, extinguishing our candles and plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as the demonic entities seized their opportunity, breaching the weakened barrier. I shouted for everyone to hold their ground, but the fear was too much for some. Mark, who had faltered during the first ritual, broke away from the group, his screams echoing through the chamber as the shadows closed in on him. I could feel the darkness closing in around us, the malevolent energy almost suffocating. Desperation fueled my actions as I scrambled to reposition the relics and reignite the candles. With trembling hands, I held up the crucifix and continued the incantations, my voice rising above the cacophony of demonic whispers. Slowly, the protective circle began to reform, pushing the shadows back. But the cost was high. By the time the circle was fully restored, Mark was gone, dragged into the darkness by the malevolent forces we had unleashed. The rest of the team huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. We had managed to repel the immediate threat, but it was clear that our victory was temporary. The demons were still there, lurking just beyond the light, waiting for another chance to strike. The realization that we had lost one of our own hit us hard. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but there was no time for grief. We needed to finish the ritual and seal the demons away for good. Gathering what remained of our strength and courage, we prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that the true battle was yet to come. As the darkness loomed, we knew that we were facing an enemy beyond our understanding, a force that thrived on our fear and desperation. The loss of Mark was a harsh reminder of the stakes, and it steeled our resolve. We could not afford any more mistakes. We had to complete the ritual perfectly this time, or we would all be doomed. We gathered in a tight circle, each holding a relic or a holy symbol. I took a deep breath and began the incantation again, my voice steady despite the terror gnawing at my insides. The others followed suit, their voices blending with mine. creating a tapestry of sound that resonated through the ancient chamber. The air crackled with energy, and the temperature plummeted further, but we pressed on, determined to see the ritual through to the end. The shadows gathered at the edges of our circle, their malevolent eyes glowing in the dim light. They hissed and whispered, trying to break our concentration, but we held firm. I could feel the power of the ritual building, the holy energy pushing against the darkness. It was a battle of wills, and we were fighting with everything we had. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to shake. The chamber seemed to pulse with a dark, rhythmic energy, and the walls echoed with distant, tortured screams. It felt as if the very monastery was coming alive, reacting to the ancient forces we had unleashed. The relics glowed with an ethereal light, their power surging in response to our prayers. For a brief moment, I dared to hope that we were succeeding. But then, a chilling laugh filled the air, cutting through our chants like a knife. It was a sound that froze the blood in our veins, a sound that spoke of ancient, boundless evil. The demonic entities were not just shadows. They had a leader, a powerful force that had been imprisoned for centuries and was now free because of our meddling. I could feel its presence, a dark and malevolent intelligence that watched us with a mix of amusement and contempt. The circle wavered again, and a tendril of darkness lashed out, striking one of the archaeologists, Claire. She cried out in pain as the dark energy wrapped around her, pulling her toward the edge of the circle. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her back into the safety of the light. The shadows hissed in frustration, retreating momentarily. Claire's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she managed to regain her composure and resume the chant. We couldn't afford any more disruptions. With renewed determination, we continued the ritual, our voices rising in a crescendo of faith and defiance. The shadows pressed harder, their whispers becoming screams, their forms growing more defined and menacing. But we held on, drawing strength from each other and from the relics that seemed to vibrate with holy power. I could feel the barrier strengthening, the light pushing back the darkness inch by inch. And then, with a final, desperate surge of will, we completed the incantation. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, a pure and searing energy that burned away the shadows and filled the air with a deafening roar. The demonic entities shrieked in agony, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the light consumed them. When the light finally faded, the chamber was silent. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. We stood there, breathless and exhausted, but alive. The relics lay at our feet, their power spent, but they had done their job. The demons were sealed away once more, and the monastery was safe. But the cost had been high. We had lost Mark, and the trauma of what we had experienced would haunt us forever. As we made our way out of the chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only just begun to understand the true nature of the evil we had faced. And I knew that the memory of those dark, twisted shadows would stay with me for the rest of my days. The climb out of the chamber was slow and silent. Each of us was lost in our thoughts, grappling with the weight of what had just transpired. The monastery, once a symbol of spiritual sanctuary, now felt like a tomb filled with echoes of ancient horrors. The daylight outside seemed surreal, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness we had battled below. As we reached the surface, the reality of our situation hit us hard. We had survived, but the cost was unimaginable. Mark's absence was a gaping void in our group, and the loss weighed heavily on us. Claire's eyes were still haunted, her face pale from the ordeal. The others were similarly shaken, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and lingering fear. We gathered our belongings, preparing to leave the site as quickly as possible. The relics and texts were carefully packed, treated with a new level of respect and caution. These artifacts were no longer just historical curiosities. They were powerful, dangerous objects that had the potential to unleash hell on Earth. I made a mental note to ensure they were studied and stored properly, in a place where they could do no more harm. As we loaded the equipment into our vehicles, I took a final look at the monastery. It stood silent and imposing, a relic of a time long past, now harboring secrets that were better left undisturbed. I felt a deep sense of regret for our part in awakening the dark forces within. But there was also a sense of duty, a realization that our work as historians and protectors of knowledge came with great responsibility. The drive back to our base camp was somber. No one spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what we had experienced hung over us, a dark cloud that seemed impossible to shake. I replayed the events in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed, ways I could have prevented the catastrophe. But the past could not be undone. All we could do now was move forward and ensure that such a mistake never happened again. Upon reaching the camp, we were met with concerned faces. Our colleagues, who had remained behind, quickly realized something had gone terribly wrong. We recounted the events, the discovery of the hidden chamber, the artifacts, and the failed ritual that had led to Mark's disappearance. The reactions were a mix of shock, fear, and a renewed respect for the dangers that lay hidden in the past. I took it upon myself to document everything in meticulous detail, creating a record that would serve as both a warning and a guide for future generations. The texts and relics were secured, and I reached out to colleagues in the field of demonology and exorcism, seeking their expertise and advice on how to handle the situation. As the days turned into weeks, the immediate terror of that night began to fade, but the psychological scars remained. Nightmares plagued us, and the sense of having been touched by something profoundly evil lingered. Therapy sessions and support from the university helped, but I knew it would take time for the wounds to heal. One evening, as I sat alone in my study, poring over the ancient texts once more, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, half expecting to see a shadowy figure, but it was only Claire. She had been struggling with her own demons, and we found solace in each other's company, sharing our fears and hopes for the future. We vowed to continue our work, but with a renewed sense of caution and respect for the unknown. Our experience had shown us that history was not just a collection of dates and artifacts, but a living, breathing entity with the power to affect the present in unimaginable ways. As I closed the book and looked out into the darkening night, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. The world was full of mysteries, some better left unsolved. But armed with knowledge and faith, we would face whatever came next, together. If you were in the historian's shoes, would you have the courage to open the trunk, or would you leave the secrets buried forever? If you like this supernatural story, subscribe, like, and comment, and see the next supernatural horror story.